my review of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition, today on Dungeoncraft. Welcome to Dungeoncraft. I'm Professor DungeonMaster, and this channel is about playing the ultimate game of D&D and all role-playing games.
And I'm Deathbringer. Level up your game by subscribing to this putrid channel and click the bell icon to be informed when we release new videos every Thursday.
Ever since its first appearance in the late 1980s, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay has enjoyed a reputation as the grimmest, darkest, most lethal role-playing game around. But does it deserve that reputation? Today, I'm going to take a look at the history of the game as well as review the new 4th edition. I've been familiar with Warhammer way back since that first edition. A friend of mine came to me recruiting players for a new game. He had just gotten it and asked me if I wanted to play, and I said, "No thank you, sir. The D&D 2nd edition is the ultimate role-playing game, and nothing will ever top it." Yeah, I actually said that. But I relented and gave Warhammer a chance, and I'm glad I did because it quickly became one of my favorite games. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay struck a different tone than D&D. It was dark, gritty, Renaissance-era world with firearms. And there were dwarves and elves and orcs, but most of the characters were human with working-class backgrounds like carpenter, ratcatcher, and servant, with German names like Hans Schaefer and Helmut Kleiner. The writing was distinctly British. Black, dry humor. The artwork was different too, with a penchant for crumbling architecture and bizarre creatures and punk rock dwarves rendered in a nightmare-infused Gustave Doré meets H.R. Giger kind of style. For those of you only familiar with Warhammer Fantasy through the battle game, this version is way more grounded. Emperor Karl Franz is not the heroic figure riding to the front on his war griffin. He's an ineffectual politician, presiding over an empire that's rotting from within with greedy and corrupt ministers and selfish and decadent nobles and cultists seek and recruit members from all strata of society and secretly plot its downfall. The supporting material was first-rate, far creepier than the vanilla TSR stuff at the time. It featured the magnificent enemy within campaign that included great adventures like Shadows over Bogenhofen and Power Behind the Throne. Classic adventures that ironically offered more in the way of investigation and roleplay than it did in combat. Warhammer proved to be so popular with our group that it supplanted D&D for many years. Sadly, we lost our game master. He tragically got married to a girl that didn't play games. It always hits hard when you lose someone in their prime. But the players still wanted to continue, and they elected me Game Master, so I have continued that campaign for 30 years now. Now, about 10 years ago, we converted to basic D&D for reasons I'll talk about later, but Warhammer is a system with which I am intimately familiar. The first edition of Warhammer lasted nearly 20 years in print. It was supplanted by the 2nd edition, which came in 2005 from Black Library, which cleaned up the rules and offered a new magic system, which was never the 1st edition's strong point. And a new facelift came in just 3 years later in 2008 with Fantasy Flight doing the 3rd edition, which didn't resemble previous editions at all. It was essentially a different game with different types of dice and cards and tokens and a very board gamey feel that was rejected by the fan base, although the supporting material was actually very good for that. The failure of the 3rd edition led to the creation of Zweihander Grim and Perilous, a Warhammer retro clone, which was kickstarted with great success. It's won a bunch of awards, and it had a great write-up in Forbes recently, of all places, which is one of my favorite magazines. I mean, when I'm just kicking back on my yacht, playing some RPGs, I'm always reading Forbes. And that's where we come to the 4th edition by Cubicle 7, a British company who've picked up the Warhammer license and tried to bring things back to basics and back to that original system. So we're going to take a look at that today. This is not a playtest review. It's only me reviewing the book. So if you have playtest experience, I welcome your comments below. This is a huge hardbound book, lovingly rendered and illustrated, very beautiful, 350 pages. We have a bestiary description of the old world, Game Master section, and 50% of the book, nearly, is devoted to character creation and skills. So this is like having the player's handbook, DM's guide, monster manual, and the entire campaign world in one place. We begin with flavor text and splash page illustrations, which are awesome, very evocative of the dark flavor of the world. I'm a big fan. But it doesn't go on too long before we get into making a character. So our hypothetical character, we're going to call him Kurt Wolfheim, and we're going to assume he's human, like most characters are. And Kurt's going to have 10 defining characteristics: weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, initiative, agility, dexterity, intelligence, willpower, fellowship, and wounds, which are hit points, and fate and resilience. Fate is essentially a get-out-of-death-free card, and resilience is the equivalent of inspiration points. You generate attributes by rolling 2d10 and adding 20. So we're going to assume for this demonstration that I roll the average 31 for each stat. Now, there are a lot of stats here. There are 6 stats alone for just dealing with particular combat situations. And what D&D covers in a single stat, dexterity, is divided into ballistics, initiative, agility, and dexterity. You've heard the phrase, less is more. Well, Warhammer believes more is more. You get everything broken down into smaller components, which we'll soon see. There are 8 general classes divided into 8 careers each. You can roll a career randomly, which gets you more experience points that you can use to develop your character right out of the gate, or you could select one. There are 64 careers to choose from. Each gets its own page and accompanying illustration, which are excellent. Each career has 4 tiers. Characters use experience points to purchase skills and ability improvements. This is a big departure and the best new feature of this game. In the past, once you completed the Watchman career, you had to move on to a different career. In this version, you could take the equivalent of the civil service exam and be promoted to desk sergeant and beyond. Or you could switch out and pursue a different career. It's very versatile. The symbols represent different advances you can take. So Kurt Wolfheim is a soldier, and this cross means he can improve his weapon skill right now. So I'm going to improve it 4 points to 35. He's also battle-born, which adds 5 points to his starting profile. Weapon skill, raising it to 40. Kurt and his new adventuring buddies are attacked by bandits. Let's assume the bandits are average in every way and have 30 in all their stats. Kurt's initiative of 31 gives him the first move. To hit his opponent, Kurt needs to roll under his weapon skill of 40 with percentile dice. Every 10 under the weapon skill is called a success level. So if Kurt rolls a 39, it's success level 1. 23 would be success level 2. For the purpose of our demonstration, let's say he rolls a 29. Combat is an opposed test, which means the bandit gets to parry Kurt's blow by rolling under his weapon skill, but he has to get at least a success level of 2 or better in order to do it. Weapons do static damage, so Kurt's sword does 4 plus his strength bonus, which is the tens digit in his strength, in this case 3, for a total of 7 in the location of the right leg. Location is determined by reversing the percentile roll from 29 to 92 and consulting this hit location chart on every character sheet, which I've always thought is a very clever mechanic. So from 7 damage, we subtract the bandit's toughness of 3 and any armor the bandit is wearing. If, for example, he was wearing leather breeches for +1 armor, that would absorb a point of damage. Makes sense. Armor absorbs damage. The bandit has no armor, so Kurt does a total of 4 wounds damage. Now, if Kurt was lucky enough to roll doubles, an 11, a 22, or a 33, he would roll on the critical chart, and the higher, the better. He could crack his opponent's eye socket, blind him, stab him in the thigh, severing an artery, or decapitate him. A missed roll of doubles is a critical fumble, and Kurt could drop his blade. There's also a concept called advantage. If Kurt is successful in hits, on the next blow, he gets +10 to hit, and that number will compound as long as Kurt keeps hitting and his opponent keeps failing to parry. Magic is divided into 8 different spheres with an associated color. So red is the color of the bright wizards they're the fire wizards, and they get 8 spells that focus on one type of magic. In this case, it would be fire. And it's got this mutating effect, whereas the fire wizard grows in power, they get angrier and their eyes seem to burn and their hair turns red. So magic is very creepy and dangerous and sort of mutates your character as you go along. There's also a critical failure table for wizards. If they fail to cast a spell with doubles, then they roll on a minor or a major corruption chart. And you could gain a corruption point or have a mutation like a tentacle popping out your back, or unleash your spell accidentally on your own party, or just blow your own head off, which is very cool, very much up my alley. Clerics have multiple gods, very similar to D&D. Each god has its own separate thing, like Shalia is the goddess of healing, so you get mostly healing spells. And there's also a critical prayer failure, and your god could get angry at you and refuse to answer them again. The bestiary is well done. It includes lots of monsters, Warhammer classics like the Beastmen and Skaven, as well as newer ones we haven't seen before, like Cave Squigs, and I love them. Other importations include the Between Adventures rules, random tables that tell what happened to your character between sessions, courtesy of Warhammer Quest. I love this. Check out Betrayed. A friend, family member, or ally turns on you, so Kurt can return home from his adventures to find his wife has stolen his money and run off with the local noble. Great stuff. Other things I love include the corruption mechanic. You can re-roll a bad die roll in exchange for a corruption point, which accumulate, and then you can end up with a mutation. This is a great way to wed the idea of the corrupting influence of chaos to the mechanics of the game. It also makes chaos something that lives within the characters, not just an outside force, and I love that. Again, as I mentioned, the career path is very versatile, and I enjoyed the combat system. I'm actually a fan of the advantage-disadvantage thing, because in previous editions of Warhammer, evenly matched characters, combat went on forever, and that's not going to be the case here. I also love the modularity of the combat system. There are a lot of optional rules, like rolling for initiative, that once you learn the basic rules, you can incorporate these optional rules and sort of customize your own gaming experience. And the artwork and attention of detail shows the designers clearly love the old world and have a lot of respect for previous editions of the game. Now, things I dislike. There are a few mechanics that are redundant. Fate, Fortune, Resilience, Resolve, that could be compressed into just 2 stats. And do we really need 4 stats to cover reflexes? I don't think so. The XP system and advancement system is very crunchy. You purchase advancement in 1% increments, paying 25 experience points if it's up to 5%, then that number increases to 30 experience points if it's 6 to 10, and so on. That's a lot of bookkeeping. The difference between a 3% and a 5% is negligible, so I would have rounded up to 5% or 10% increments like in previous editions. It's very flippy. You read the Wounded Leg description on 177 and it says you gain a bleed token, but to find out what that means, you got to flip back to 168. I would have liked to have seen a ribbon bookmark sewn into the spine like Dungeon Crawl Classics. Other strange, non-intuitive choices including a gorgeous map of the old world on the front cover and the back cover. It's nice that the book looks pretty, but if you're going to have a chart-dependent game, I want those charts at my fingertips. Same thing with the oddly designed character sheet that puts the critical hit locations, which you refer to all the time, on the back of the sheet, while minutia like your character's ambitions and the names of the party members are on the front. A character sheet should look like a control board. Most of your time you spend fighting, everything you need for combat should be on the front of the sheet. And I hate the way character careers are organized. They group and alphabetize them by class. That means they re-alphabetize them every 8 pages. You're jumping from apothecary to lawyer to wizard to watchman to advisor to hedge witch, villager, coachman, witch hunter, boatman, smuggler, back to witch. I'm getting witchlash here. And here's the thing, it makes no difference. Class is meaningless. When you write down your class is a burger, it makes no impact on the character at all for the rest of the character's career. I cannot stress how nuts this made me as I was preparing for this review, trying to find this career or that career and not being able to get it at my fingertips. Very frustrating. Having played Warhammer and other games for many years, I can tell you it is a fact that Warhammer is not nearly as deadly as its reputation. The average blow only scores 4 wounds, and the average person has 9 to 10, which means it takes at least 3 blows to take a person out. Now compare that to this game, the basic edition from 1980. A thief had 3 or 4 hit points and an armor class of 14. And you were dead if you reached 0 hit points. This game, objectively, is way more deadly than Warhammer ever was. True, you could roll a critical, but our character Kurt only has a 3% chance of doing so. Even when Kurt completes the 3rd tier, he's still only going to have, overall, about a 5% chance of rolling that critical. That's the exact same chance as rolling a natural 20 on a 20-sided die. If you play with a house rule that on a natural 20 you do double damage or something like that, that's pretty much the same thing. So why do we all think that Warhammer was so deadly? It's completely due to aesthetics. If you have a cover that says, "A Grim World of Perilous Adventure," People are primed to think it's going to be grim and perilous. And the artwork of John Blanche and Tim Miller looked darker, so it felt darker. Same for gritty starter careers like Beggar and Critical Hit charts. It also embraced demons and devils at exactly the time 2nd edition was dumping them. It's true Warhammer is more realistic because armor absorbs damage, but in retrospect, I lost way more AD&D characters than I ever lost Warhammer characters. Lamentations of the Flame Princess showed how you could take this basic engine, put a different chassis on it, and get a grimdark monster truck. This is one of the reasons I converted my Warhammer campaign to D&D about 10 years ago. The other being that it's just too crunchy. I have 6 to 8 players. Warhammer works best when you're playing with 2 to 3 players. That's not to say Warhammer is a bad game. It's a good game, even a great game. Probably the best iteration of Warhammer ever. And it's similar enough to previous editions that you could convert old scenarios to Warhammer 4E with a minimal of fuss. I got mine from Amazon.com for $38, and when you consider this is a player's handbook, Dungeon Master's guide, monster manual, and complete world all in one, this is a very good value. The Dungeoncraft final verdict on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, +3 critical. If you found this video helpful, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. If I missed anything or you want to elaborate, please put it in the comments section below. Also below, you'll find links to our Facebook group and Patreon, where I'm going to include another video where I talk about my personal Warhammer experiences. Once again, for Dungeoncraft, this is Professor Dungeon Master. I'll see you soon, and until then, may all your rolls be 20s.